Hello and welcome to another episode of Climate Watch. I'm Fei Fei. AI is working as a catalyst and bringing unprecedented transformation to different industries, including those critical to global and sustainability goals. Unlike traditional technological tools, AI can process massive data sets, uncover complex correlations, and generate more optimal solutions. This capability not only helps revamp historically unsustainable industries, but also levels the playing field for small and medium-sized enterprises. What new opportunities will this transformation bring for businesses? What are the good practices and lessons from current AI adoption? And what future steps do we still need to take to optimize and maximize AI's potential? To get the answers, I spoke with Xiao Ma. He's the professor of Entrepreneurship and Management at Nottingham Business School.
Thank you for joining us today on the podcast. So you have quite experiences when it comes to the real world practices, especially among entrepreneurs, among businesses. How would you describe, the overall role that the AI technology has been playing in today's markets, really, or in the world of business at the moment?
I think that's such a timely question that everyone's probably asking around in a very similar way. I believe we're at a crossroad of how technology actually transforms industries. And I'm talking about plurals. And probably this is going to become the majority of industries. I think AI is playing a catalyst for an unprecedented transformation of a lot of industries that is unseen before. AI is probably the driving force right now. And I think for individual businesses, AI is almost going to redefine whether or not you still have a competitive edge. So for future-looking businesses, if they have a foreseeable innovation and foreseeable future with a strong competitive advantage, I do believe without the power of AI, a business would lose that edge. And with the power of AI, a business is likely to maintain and maybe break through with some more competitive advantages. Otherwise, business without any reaction to AI is probably going to struggle or sooner or later go into a zombie status. It's quite a common term in the business world where businesses are able to pay off the debt that they have to pay off on an annual basis, but do not have the cash or the profitability to be able to innovate anymore.
So they're basically going sort of down a slope and eventually maybe die out on the market someday in the future without the help of AI.
I would say so. In a different way, you can look at AI almost like a computer device or a word processing document. So if you imagine the majority of the workers these days, you've either got a Microsoft version of Word or some other versions of Word, depends on what operating system you use. You don't feel like you are using it, but if you imagine 30, 40 years ago when these softwares are not available, the kind of productivity out from a company, and now the standard productivity coming out from each company, then what you're talking about with AI is effectively the same thing as we have 30, 40 years ago when the word processing document, the Excel first emerges as mainstream technology. You can't ignore it, then you realize all your competitors are using them. Then sooner or later, you're not necessarily falling behind. It's just everyone else is running faster than you.
So it's like with computers 3-4 decades ago that maybe you don't have to be an expert in the use of the computers, but you definitely need to know how to use it because eventually, like right now, no one can work without the office software you mentioned or a computer at the moment. So in the case of the office software and also the computers, and I think of over the past 30 years, they've really enhanced our efficiency for our work. And I imagine same thing would happen with AI. What are the major ways that AI can help us enhance our efficiency? And I think for us on this podcast, we are really interested in climate goals and how will AI help us to achieve the climate goals and the sustainability goals in practice?
Right. I think that's a very important question. Almost a lot of the people have to ask themselves. This goes beyond the business world. A lot of different people need to think about how and what they work on will have an impact on that. I think one of the key roles AI is playing these days, which trumps some of the other technology, is specifically helping with sustainability in terms of the much wider sustainability understanding, which we call them triple bottom line. You're an expert yourself in looking into this space. So we're looking at the environmental, the social, and the economical bottom line to be met almost at the same time. Then should you go out and start looking at how people are ticking off those boxes, you see, in my view, an unfortunate trend because of the funding trajectories and because of the current mechanisms. You see a lot of the piecemeal deal. When I say piecemeal deal, you see people doing a lot of ESG work. Sorry, excuse my straightness, but you see people greenwashing to suggest you're doing so and so to help with environment, to help with social impact, but really just to focus on the economic sustainability. For example, we have worked with businesses in various parts of the world where they have taken up funding to look at biodiversity at farms. However, by achieving the biodiversity, which is achievable, you do actually hurt the productivity of the farming activity. Sometimes it's animal husbandry, sometimes it's actually crop farming. Therefore, behind the scene, farmers started compensating, but those are not counted into the overall calculation of the entire ecosystem. Therefore, you're ticking a box of a piecemeal operation, but you're missing the overall assessment. What AI comes in, this is very handy because previously you model these impacts. You can model the impacts in a piecemeal deal quite nicely. But when there are too many parameters, the modeling does not work. Because the minute you have more than 3 parameters that has an impact on each other, you run into a classic problem which goes beyond three-body problems. As we know that from that popular book, Three-Body Problems, the more you have, the more unpredictability you have. But AI is the perfect tool for this sort of things. When things you cannot model, but you can model the influence between factors in between. And AI don't care whether or not you have a million factors or you have a billion factors. You can put them all into the model and ask AI to predict what's the potential output of it. Then this is where I see AI playing the most influential role in sustainability measures, which is to look at the trade-offs among sustainability goals, the trade-offs among the social impact, the environmental impact, and the economic impact across the board. And that would really help us to find potentially the optimum solution to achieve the sustainability as a whole instead of ticking certain boxes as a goal.
That's very true. Like, especially in recent years, and also particularly, I think, in some European countries, people are losing faith in the whole ESG brand. And people are tired of the greenwashing of a lot of the companies out there. You're sort of proposing that with the help of AI, ESG can start to looking promising again, that people can start to trust ESG someday in the future with the help of AI technology.
That's probably only half of the story. I think AI can help with it, but AI will not be a silver bullet to solve the problem. I think we are still in the mix, and we need to drive the AI to be able to interpret across parameters that cut across all sustainability measures, not only from ESG perspective, but actually looking at the value chain. We need to break off this thinking. We're looking at a company as a focal. As long as we still have a targeted company in the play and taking that as the measurement, we will almost inevitably fall into the trap of taking a piecemeal deal. Because I'm sharing with this because we actually have a project called Moss Mob that's more sustainable, more profitable business model innovation, where we take a number of case studies. We actually study them very closely with a lot of businesses, go into their operations to look at how they operate. And very quickly, we found out there are very powerful corporations, as you can understand. They actually own the value chain or own a big part of the supply chain. They have the power to determine how certain operations needs to be designed. Therefore, if you look at the measurement of a particular company, they look very shiny on all measures. You look beyond the boundary of the firm, you look at the supply chain, you look at the entire value chain, you realize the reason why a particular firm is performing really well is because their suppliers and their customers both suffers.
So they are the
So this
ones
is
becoming to shoulder the result, the consequences, instead of the corporates
correct.
themselves.
Exactly. So this is the trade-off we're talking about. So you can optimize a single firm. However, you're losing the collective benefits of that value chain. So with the help of AI, what we should really be building as a collective of people, we need to look at the value chain as the unit of measurement. Would certain actions be able to make this entire value chain more sustainable, socially, economically, and environmentally, other than making this company more sustainable? So once you start putting that measurement down to it, you start realizing, actually, at a certain point, there is a equilibrium. So yes, for a particular company, if you go beyond the equilibrium, you might look better. However, you are hurting the entire chain. However, if you reach the optimal point, the entire chain is performing a lot better than it was before. Then you've got a solution.
But that sounds like a very, very massive project. I would imagine that requires collaborations among different governments, among different corporates, big or small, among even different data centers. People can be very protective of their data at the moment. How do you think that we can make that happen in reality?
It's interesting in a sense. It does sound daunting a lot of the time, but we've actually managed to collect quite a number of use cases that is achieving that. Some of them are unbelievably innovative because you're looking at extremely traditional businesses where you would not think they have anything to do with AI in that sector, but they are actually restructuring their entire value chain. But this is where I think the other thing I want to throw into the conversation with what AI has done is effectively leveling the play field for SMEs. So we've actually seen SMEs driving some of these initiatives by restructuring a value chain around themselves and look at a whole chain operation optimization rather than an individual business. And that's really interesting. I'll give you an example in beef farming to tell you that what is happening in beef farming sector, which most of people even today would think beef farming is so behind. It's a bunch of farmers herding cattle around. Not anymore. In the innovative farms, they're not doing that anymore. The amount of AI goes into it and how they optimize the entire value chain is extremely interesting. I think for both policymaking as well as studies, as well as cases for other businesses to look into.
And in the case of beef farming, that's been happening on a broader scale, or it's just been experimenting by a few innovative farms?
At the moment, it's being innovated by a few leading farms. I wouldn't say just farms. You're actually looking at a whole ecosystem of players getting together to really try to do this very differently.
So from suppliers, from the farmers to the buyers, and probably, for example, supermarkets to
It
consumers.
Yeah, it goes even beyond that. So since we're on this topic, I might as well share, some of the details. So it's actually, we do actually have a project around this area called Beef Twin, which is funded by UK Research and Innovation, looking at new business models through AI, empowered by various aspects in the farming process. So what we're looking at in this case is effectively working with a bunch of partners, very innovative partners that we have, to look at how do we measure the entire ecosystem output, then convert that into impacts on the triple bottom line, therefore to come up with the best way of farming. So people got involved. You're absolutely right. The suppliers, you're looking at feed providers, right? People who provide feed for the farm. And this also includes the pastures, right? What kind of grass you grows on your farm. What species of cattle would be able to produce a higher quality meat and potentially better quality of meat with less methane produced. So, for example, what we feed them and the way we feed them would give them more microbials that eats methane or suppress methane and less of them that produces methane. So that's a piece of work that we cannot model. Going back to the previous words, it has to be AI modeling to work on those because I give you some of the parameters around and you can see the complexity of this. We need to understand the species of the cows. We need to understand the microbial population inside of cow. We need to understand the feed that goes into their stomach. What do they eat from the ground? We need to understand how they get farmed, right? How many times are you going out into the farm? Are you 100% grazing or you're half housed at a certain point? Depends on the weather. For example, in the UK, they are half housed in the winter, some of them. Some of them are entirely in the wild. Then where are you geolocationally? What kind of grass are you getting, right? Depends on how you are farmed, what some of the treatment of the cow dumps, cow pads to be better optimized? How about the manures? How do you manage the manures? Then what channels are you going into the consumption? Are you going into the consumption via supermarket, or you're going to restaurant directly to the high-end restaurant and have a higher value returned? In which case, what's the survival rate of each of the kettles? We have seen some very shocking practice where they bring kettles up with a higher survival rate, but with less of a manure produced and less unnecessary storage of feed. Therefore, you're cutting methane almost at every stage of the production, but with the same amount of cattle, you're producing more meat. Or you can look at this in a slightly different way. If you were to produce the same amount of meat, now you have less cattle and you have less feed. And I didn't even mention healthcare. You can actually measure in the healthcare from a camera, which we already have, in a corner of the farm to look at how the cows move to predict certain diseases, and that's very achievable. So you turn treatment almost into a preventative care. Then through this whole system, you start innovating on what goes where at what stage. Then because of this visibility of almost the entire the entire life cycle of the livestock, you know what they're eating, you know who they are, you know what stage they are, you even know the weight gain on a quite finite, quite detailed basis. Then the latest innovation we've seen is actually there are certain banks giving out loans for these cattle. So the cattle are not paid by the farmers themselves anymore. The cattle are paid by investors. And this has an extreme interest and impact on the business model because cattle farming previously is a heavy asset industry. Now, with investment coming into the farm, it has just become an asset light industry. So the scalability becomes possible. Then because it's scalable, we are seeing smart farm constructions companies now joining forces with farmers to build up smart farms at scale and join forces as a stakeholder. So there's another big chunk of investment has been, offloaded to someone else. And then because of the sheer amount of data that's being produced, the local governments that these companies are working with are now buying the data collection of the farm. So that's another technology investment has been offloaded. The whole
ripple
impact
effects.
is, yeah, there's a ripple effects that's changing the entire value chain. So now we're looking at actually the same amount of beef, as I said, being produced with less methane, much better logistics, much better welfare of the cows being looked after, and a much better social status, much better working environment for the farmers. We are one of the other things, the farmers struggles from keeping their sons and daughters in the farm anymore. A lot of them have left the farmland. Now we're seeing some of them wishing to stay on the farmland because their farming has just changed so much. We're seeing farmers with a moped or a motorbike with tablets around. That's what they do. Then you're seeing other farmers sitting in front of computers looking at how your herd is behaving. It's a different farming now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's beyond imagination, especially in the circle of people who really care about the environment and climate. For years, I think the consensus among them is that, especially when it comes to beef farming, is highly pollutant, and is also unethical when it comes to animal rights. But right now, that's a very awesome example that you are sharing that with the help of AI technology, is not only improving on every factor, on every part of the producing the production and also the farming methods, they're also changing the way that farms run, with even with financing part being renovated at the same time. That's a very interesting example, and I think a lot of people would be relieved now that maybe they don't have to carry that burden when they want to enjoy a burger, but can really enjoy that burger without the burden. Very interesting point that you mentioned is that AI, you are proposing that AI is leveraging the playing field, especially for smaller players. So that means that we're having for smaller businesses, for startups especially, they're having more opportunities on the market, especially, for example, in clean tech or in people who want to work on the sustainability goals.
Uh, that's absolutely correct. So, for example, within that bee farming example, in fact, most of the companies we're talking about here, they are small companies. None of them is large, none of them is listed, apart from the genetic companies, but the rest of them are all SMEs. So it's a collection of SMEs joining up together to be able to innovate. The construction as a service company is a SME. The flagship farms who come up with the smart farming method by testing the combination of feed, the way you farm, and the quality of the beef, that's a small company. The smart logistics to do just-in-time feed collection as well as veterinary services is a small company. There's a smart logistic company who does the live animal transportation, that's a SME. So there's a lot of opportunities for those people. So I think going back to your point, the opportunity exists for the SMEs. There's quite a lot of them. So I would say, in a nutshell, there's about 3 or 4 different categories of opportunities exist. First of all, is the combination of parameters through different methodologies. So, for example, one of my collaborator works in Cambridge Computer Lab, and there is a whole initiative called planetary computing. So they're using satellite images and a few other sensor data to be able to predict the deforestation and the loss of water and the depletion of Amazon rainforest, so on and so forth, to look at the kind of a twin problems between climate change and the biodiversity loss and other productivities. And that's before AI, you wouldn't necessarily want to model that because the data does not exist and there are too many parameters. So, but now it's just engineering. It's just engineering these days with computer visions. Then that's probably at a grander scale of when you start combining data from different sectors, then you discover an opportunity. And that's for SMEs as well. And that initiative is actually quite small from Cambridge and Allen II Institute in the UK.
So I just have this question pop into my mind that do you think with this trend, this innovative trend among SMEs, they're going to influence big corporates to take on more AI technology, smart technology, working on their sustainability goals, working on their ESG truly, instead of just ticking off the box, as you mentioned?
I think so. It's in a very similar way that, as we discussed, that companies without AI these days or not using AI adequately would start losing their competitive edge. So what we're seeing, going back to that beef farming example, is the smaller companies collectively is challenging the dominating powers in a few markets already internationally. So there are people waking up to the idea of, oh, if we don't do this, we will lose beef farming as an industry very quickly. We have seen this for a number of industries that moving from one part of the world to the other part of the world. That's the whole initiative of reshoring that has been brought up on the table by saying, oh, we need to reshore A, we need to reshore B. However, by balancing the goals, the triple bottom line goals, you can actually do this much more responsibly. And that's what AI can really help. So the project I was referring to, founded by the UK government, is to look at that as a business model for smallhold farms, which is extremely interesting because in Europe, the smallhold farms also need to perform at the same level. And how do we, exactly as you put it, how do we produce a sustainable beef, knowing that we will satisfy the market demand of the beef production, but to cut down the number of cattle we have? That's actually our goal. And we do believe that when the project is successful, we should have recommendations for different kind of farms in different contexts to do that. So that's one potential solution out there. And through that, we've also seen other very innovative business, where I was going to hit to, is there are niche market that people are not aware of. So we have a venture within this beef farming example. We have a venture in our entrepreneurial community who's using cameras to look at animal behavior, and there are quite a number of startups doing that to predict diseases. Going beyond, this very same company is using drones to look at cows to predict the weight, which is yet another innovation. So there are certain pockets of innovation SMEs can go into. Again, this is a small company. There's a very small company in China who's probably the world leading company who's using cameras to predict the weights of pigs at scale. Imagine you have a farm. You have 20,000 piglets running on the farm. You have a body weight. You need to weigh each little piglet. Imagine you're very smart. You have a little gate for each one of them going through, and you have a year tag to tag them. That's already done. Just think about herding 20,000 piglets going through a gate. It's quite a work. And even make it even more interesting, we've come across so many farmers that when it comes to thousands of animals, counting them is a challenge.
Yes.
Because they move.
Yes.
They don't stay still. You don't even know how many piglets you have. So that kind of innovation comes through very easily. Then we have other firms, again, in our entrepreneurial network. So they use AI, sometimes sensors, sometimes computer imagery to look at, for example, we have a scooter company who put a camera in front of the scooter to detect the road condition in detail to suggest when the road needs to be maintained, to detect danger so that they can brake before a human being would react. So almost like a smart driving system, instead of on a Tesla or on a Xiaomi smart car, you put it on a scooter. But because you're on a scooter, you can go on the side road. So you will be able to tell the authority when and where there's a huge damage of the side road that you can fix. So that produce an entire different level of intelligence of how a city can be more sustainable. Then we have other firms who use a combination of sensor and computer imagery, again, to look at how you detect single battery cell failure before they even come into the battery pack. You know, when you produce a battery pack, some of the cells may or may not be healthy enough. So this can actually be detected in a mass production way to determine how many and which one has failed. So before you even put them into production, you can take them out if necessary. Or maybe there's only 1% of them is not performing as you wish. Then it doesn't really matter. You can send them out. Then there's another company we know of who can even do this and remake the battery in a single production line.
That's also
All
a
of these.
very big question, especially with the EV production right now in China, that with the batteries retiring and what we're going to do with these retired batteries. And this technology and this model actually can help us to reuse or recycle those batteries, really, to continue down the sustainability road.
Absolutely. So I'm only giving you a few examples. There are a lot of innovations being tested, validated, and being piloted at different factories. You know, the battery kind of a battery cell detection technology I'm referring to, that company is already in testing in pilot with quite a few OEMs. So other companies are already in the supply chain of producing early intelligence of how their solution will work. So again, we are working with them very closely to look at, okay, when this technology works, what's the economic impact? So first of all, you need to stay alive economically. Then secondly, can we actually help the battery manufacturers to be a lot more responsible in terms of social impact as well as environmental impact? So if we put our circular economy thinking in this whole game, then you're looking at technologies who can actually recycle, reuse, and reproduce almost in one go. And that would put our EV into a completely different stage.
And that's a very exciting and also very rosy future that you have pictured here. But I do have this question of, but we are still lagging behind in terms of the sustainable development goals setting out by the UN at the moment. And we are seeing this gap between very exciting innovation, taking use of AI technology happening, and on a mass scale and what's being really achieved. So why do you think, how can we catch up on this gap and close this gap really?
I think that's a that's $1 million question. I do think there's a few things. If we assume this is the era, like 30, 40 years ago, when word processing and computers just becoming the mainstream, I would say one of the key things I would do from where we are, sitting in between industry and academia, is actually education. I think we are looking at a lot of material being made available online, in particular being made available to business leaders. We would consider the AI education is not a tell business, it's a show business. You have to show people how it's done. It has to be practical. It has to be built on top of people's experience. It has to be experiential learning. However, if you look at the material, I can't quite believe at this stage of AI, there's so little experiential learning material to offer AI for business education. What I meant by that is we all know that people learn much better with your peers. It's called peer-to-peer learning or scaffolding. So your knowledge goes into your brain with the hooks of what you already knew. With an AI as your sparring partner or your learning partner to help you with it, it will be a lot easier. And but the amount of effort has been put into that is very trivial in my view. I think we need a lot of educational providers to actually host the business community and provide that experiential learning with AI together to teach AI. And right now, a lot of stuff is a tell business. Here's the material, learn yourself.
Yeah.
But you forgot that people learn through an agent. I don't want to go off track to agentic AI, but in a way, the education providers needs to almost create agentic AI for each individual learner, which is not difficult at all. We've been doing that for the last 2 years, and it's been very successful, and people do them very fast. But rolling this out needs a collective effort from a lot of people. I think that's one big challenge of what we need to get across to the community who are not very used to AI. Now, if we have that mechanism solved, then a number of questions can probably be solved fairly quickly. We're talking about the paradox of AI help with sustainability and AI's own sustainability. Is AI costing more energy, or the AI is helping you to save more energy? You have an interest of data center that has always been a huge debate, whether or not that actually is, that data center is actually producing more sustainable outcomes or causing a bit more sustainable kind of black holes.
Yeah.
But that needs different leaders, policymakers, business leaders, organizational leaders to look at what you do and the power you use in that measurement as a whole. And that could easily be addressed through education and means. People are fascinated about AI. Then the first thing they jump on is, okay, let's use this AI, let's use that AI, without thinking about what do you feed to the AI. AI needs to consume data to be accurate. It's like a baby. You have to feed the baby. You have to give the baby a good nutrition for the baby to grow adequately and become a very responsible person.
Yeah.
Same as AI. We have to treat it in that sense. So I think data issue itself is a problem in there. Then with education, again, if people are understanding the energy consumption, the kind of data cleansing that we needed, if people understand the rationale between the input, the AI processing and output, people will start understanding the biases that AI can produce. Going back to the business world, we do need high quality data and training to get it done. And that needs to be embedded into people's thinking. In fact, an individual company is still doing a piecemeal deal. I'll give you one simple example. We all kind of suffer from one interesting phenomenon. I search for a holiday, say in Rome on Google. Then I look at the flight, I book the hotel, then I go on Facebook. Then guess what Facebook advertisement is showing me? Are you looking for a hotel in Rome?
Yeah.
But I've done all of them. I don't blame Facebook in that sense, because Facebook had my Google cookies, but it didn't have my booking.com data to know I've booked my hotel. It did not have my flight agency data to understand I booked my flight. The reason being, the individual companies are dealing with siloed data. But I think people have ignored there is one agent in this entire ecosystem who knows everything. It's us. We have the power to aggregate all these data sources legally, and we have the power to put them together. So what you just described is precisely the kind of agent that probably gives us the most opportunity. So my mobile, or if I have a separate database, this is another project we're doing. We have a database to be able to contain your data from Google, your Facebook, your everything, your booking.com and your flight booking. Then it comes in to work out, so your Rome trip is fixed. I know you're available next Friday night. That in that case, there's a restaurant I can recommend, because based on where you live, there's a very nice restaurant. I know both of you like Chinese food. Go that place. It's really cool. See, that's how it works. But you also have to reverse the thinking of this time, it's not an advertising agency pushing the deal to us. It's your agent and my agent, the two of them talking to each other. Is agentic AI. Instead of being pushed with advertisement deal, we go and ask a bunch of providers to say, give me some service. Here's my consumption signal. But guess what? The majority of the people out there, the companies out there, they're not selling our data. They're not making money from the data. The restaurant makes money by selling you and I the nice food. A shoe company, a lot of guys on Amazon sells you products. A lot of other people sells you service. They don't necessarily want your data and my data to make up the product. They just need a consumption signal. So this is where I think the biggest market potentially is in the niche area where individual consumption signal can be calculated. Then instead of reversely pushed into a deal, proactively ask the provider to bid for a service. We talk about the niche. In transportation, there are other deals you can make. There are people who knows the struggle of travelers. during transportation, even daily transportation. And somebody who have the knowledge of that niche market will be the perfect founder of that area. Instead of making the transportation more sustainable, as we discussed, you can make the travelers more sustainable. Then that to me is the value chain level sustainability. You're making me as a whole more sustainable. So I travel for different reasons. Yes, I go to work, but at my workplace, there's also supermarkets. So guess what I do as an individual? I go shop on foot. Then I take my shopping to go home. I don't drive to a supermarket. I can do my shopping while I'm at a workplace. While you're taking coffee, just go to that corner shop and get your vegetable. Because when you add up all the petrol cost, it's cheaper for you to just walk and take the veggie and take that home.
And also cut
Yes,
down the
it's a
carbon
micro
footprints that everybody hope.
exactly. Then I would be a much more sustainable person. So I think that's actually the area. I think there's another hole in there as well, is we see companies saying, oh, we can, the examples I give you also fall into the same trap, that we can deal with batteries in that sense. We can deal with waste. Food waste, for example, there are lots of companies who can detect waste and suggest what can be done. Then you look at how they work with it. It's predominantly B2B services, because going into our space, consumer space, is so hard. But the collective of consumers makes a huge difference. You ask what are the challenges? One of the biggest challenges, what actions have we taken, you and I?
Yeah.
Are we aware, consciously making decisions of the actions we're taking, i.e., going to a corner shop? That could be one of the best decisions of my sustainability goal for the last week.
You know what? For years, I think among a lot of our listeners, they're getting a bit tired and frustrated, really, when it comes to personal sustainability actions, because all they can hear is just you reduce your daily use of things, eat less meat, use less water. But they've been asking, is that it? And I didn't see much of a difference made from me reducing the use of water or the consumption of meat. And I think that's probably, with the help of AI, that's probably the goal, the future that consumers, individuals can really make a difference in their daily life instead of just putting out slogans and shouting out some slogans out there, but not really seeing changes being made in the real world.
I would agree. I think there are incentives has to be designed for consumers. So I agree with you, that sentiment of saying that, oh, as consumers, you should do this, you should do that, you should do less of this, or you should start recycling that. But that's just like a command. What is my incentives of putting me through it? Going back to that educational piece, I think there is a huge amount of missing of how do we design a business model that truly co-creates value with our consumers. And consumers will do different things. I'm sorry to go back to the bee farming again. I didn't actually go to the consumer level, because on that case, we also have direct restaurant that is selling the 100% traceable beef produced by the farm. Then the consumers recognize the value of it, and they also knew that they're paying more to the state than it has to be. Then they understand what animals have done. Then you've seen quite a lot of them has become an investor of the beef farm. They are owning the initiative of more sustainable farming, and yet they're consuming the produces out from it. So you're seeing consumers being incentivized to take different, actions. Yes, the consumption of the food is probably because it's better taste, better quality. Then the financial incentives there for them to potentially have a gain from the farming. It's another incentive, but these things can be designed. A lot of technology can be designed. I think, without giving you too much of the details, two future projects we're looking at to work on. One of them is actually for climate science. We know a lot of good science from, climate researchers. They need to be communicated or put in an offer to the consumer, so the consumer are willing to consume it. So let me give you one example. In between cosmophysics and climate science, which one is more human touching? I think, personally, I think climate science is more touching us. We have a direct, instead of what's going on Mars. Then you look at all the documentaries being produced about our universe and the Mars and everything else is actually more popular, because it does hit certain, value creation parameter of us as human beings. The same thing has not been done by climate science. So we're actually working with artists to redesign what needs to be communicated in that space. because that's the power of the artist. They would have the means and the channels to be able to produce something that hits our value even better.
And
So that's
AI also has a role to play in that project.
oh yeah, hugely.
Ah,
Again, in a very similar way, there are too many parameters. So what channel is the best channel for what type of climate science is a question mark. We don't know. So you think this is one case we can solve, we can test it. But when you're doing the combination of all channels, all sciences, all ways of communication, and all different art format, you have the exact same problem. You have too many parameters, testing them will kill every one of us. So this is where AI comes in to help to simulate, to help to actually simplify some of the procedures. Then if you look at the creative individuals who are most likely to be the art entrepreneurs, have a climate-focused venture. These people are not necessarily trained into a businessman, but this is where the AI business partner can come in. I think your audience is probably very familiar with some of the phenomena happening in China. People have done experiment of asking AI to be the CEO,
yeah.
right? If that's possible, can we give every artist a CEO buddy? Let that CEO run the company, and you can focus on the
Content
art
creation.
and the create. Early on, you were asking what are the impact on entrepreneurs. That's probably the largest impact we've seen, which is to increase the productivity of different levels of workforces and free up the entrepreneurs to be much more creative and to come up with new product and new services. And entrepreneurs, the human intelligence are really good at that. And you need to free them up to let them be. And once you give the entrepreneurs that brain space, they are the best.
Yeah, exactly. That's so interesting. Thank you, Professor Ma, for such very interesting and exciting insights and views that you share with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
A huge thank you to Professor Xiao Ma with Nottingham Business School, and thank you for listening to this episode of Climate Watch. If you like what you just heard, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. You can also find me on my newsletter, Rivers and Mountains. Until next time.